Hello, thank you for joining the Introduction to Teletherapy presentation. My name is Sarah Jordan, and I'm excited to be with you today. I'm a speech language pathologist and a clinical manager on the new graduate talent acquisition team. I'm based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. I've been a practicing SLP for about 20 years, and back in 2013, I received my certification from the American Telemedicine Association in Telepractice. I do currently use teletherapy to see high school students within the juvenile prison setting. For this presentation today, I've identified some foundational consideration and knowledge that I want you to understand as a result of this presentation. And I'll be sharing with you what I feel are the most important kind of foundational topics on this subject matter. The training that I received from the American Telemedicine Association was intensive, and it was over the course of about 3 days. And in addition to some of information from that training, I have some additional links and resources for you to review at your own pace after this presentation, which does include 8 samples of teletherapy sessions. I do want to point out that the additional resources will be available along the way in the slides that we'll look at. During this presentation, I will refer both to teletherapy and telepractice interchangeably. ASHA refers to this service delivery option as telepractice on its website. And there is also a telepractice special interest group, which is group 18. ASHA has selected the term telepractice over telemedicine or telehealth, for instance, to avoid any perception that these services are only available in a healthcare setting. As an SLP myself, I personally think of and use the term teletherapy, probably just mostly because I am a provider, so I'm providing speech and language therapy to the children that I see. And as a teletherapy provider in a school setting, I'll be referring to the school setting most often, as this is the setting that I am most familiar with. However, many of the principles and methodologies are transferable to other settings and as well as best practices. And as we progress through the slides, there will be links provided to ASHA's telepractice guidelines, and that will encompass guidelines for all settings. I wanted to talk a little bit about the agenda for this presentation. First, we're going to go over some introductory information just to get a greater understanding of what teletherapy is, as well as discuss some best practices for this service delivery method. We'll pause midway through and get some questions and answers over the information that we had covered to that point. Then we will proceed and kind of move through the second half of the presentation. We'll look at elements of providing therapy, such as working with parents, session documentation, and considerations like that. We'll finish up discussing some go-to ideas, websites, and various activities. I did want to mention that the Stepping Stones Group website, we do have a COVID-19 page, and there is a link to some great resources, one of which is a list of go-to websites, and they encompass other disciplines other than SLPs as well. So I just wanted to make mention that we have resources available for everyone. So many of us have arrived at the point that we are today because of the explosion in the demand for services using teletherapy given COVID-19. And there is a lot of information to sift through, right? So both technical and clinical information. And telepractice is constantly evolving. There's ongoing education and training that helps you really maintain your expertise and really make sure that you are familiar with the changes in technology and potential clinical applications. So in using teletherapy in the most simple terms, we're really just changing the platform of our service delivery, and everything else will essentially remain the same. So you're going to be learning some new ways to bring your expertise to the students that you serve. So when we think about mastering the technology piece, this a lot of times is the biggest hurdle for many people. Some of us are familiar, right? Like, hey, are you familiar with Zoom or are you familiar with Google Meet? And you think, yes, I attend a meeting every week. But sometimes it's a little bit different. Um, when you're the one in charge of everything. And so that's sometimes where it gets tricky, just becoming familiar with whatever platform that you're going to be using. If you were embarking on this teletherapy journey before the pandemic, it would really still feel like uncharted territory and a little bit overwhelming. And so just whether, someone is a seasoned SOP or just getting started, we feel really confident in our therapy rooms, right? That's where we're in our element. We feel very skilled and accomplished there. We know how to make progress on those goals and we know what we're doing. And so we are now moving into some unprecedented times. There's a lot of variation in service delivery and requirements and how districts are moving forward. And we really have a whirlwind timeline, it seems, imposed upon us, as we're starting the school year. So many of us and the families that we serve, they may also be feeling overwhelmed at home, and just really concerned by how to navigate everything and all of the changes that are occurring. So I just encourage you to be gentle with yourself, as you move through this process and you're getting up to speed and becoming familiar with this platform and service delivery. And sometimes things may feel a little bit overwhelming when we look solely at the big picture. So if you think really about breaking things down into smaller, really more achievable goals, that will be maybe perhaps a more realistic way of mastering some of the objectives that you have outlined for yourself. And my hope is really that after this presentation, that you'll be able to develop a streamlined plan to get your teletherapy sessions up and running. So we're going to look a little bit at some technology and setting considerations for the initial phase. So I wanted to include this reference slide for you, and these are links from ASHA and will point you in the right direction when you have questions. I'm sure many of you have been to some of these websites before. I do want to note that there are some links for state considerations as well, and there's really a growing number of states that have legal or regulatory requirements regarding telepractice. So prior to initiating services, you just want to be familiar with what the requirements are in your state and the policies regarding telepractice. So I just want to really encourage you to do your own due diligence, regarding these requirements. I think it's really important that you don't rely just solely on what someone tells you, as many people may be entering this service delivery model under these more relaxed regulations, during this pandemic. And what is allowable now may not be historically the standard of what is required. And so we just want to make sure that you have the necessary guidance and the necessary links so that you can get the proper information at any time that you think that you might need those references. So you'll want to look at the features of the platform that you will be using. And I think there's a lot of variety right now. Some people are using Google Meet, some are using Zoom, some might be using a Microsoft. And so we want to take into consideration all the features of that platform. So whatever option your school is using, you want to know, like, what abilities does this platform have? You know, are there screen sharing abilities? Can you annotate? Do you have access to whiteboards here? And then you want to figure out, like, are there any shortcomings, or are there any kind of like workarounds, you know, that you need to be more efficient? You know, I know some, like I can think of offhand, like Google Meet. They don't have a whiteboard, you know, built in there, but they have a plugin that you can get, you know, and then you have that available to you. So there may be something, you know, within your platform that you may think, you know, initially, like you don't have access to that, but there may be something additional that you can add to that, or a website that you're able to utilize and get some of those functions that you think you may need. So we're going to take into consideration the needs for both you and your student. We're going to move through the next few slides and cover much of what's on this reference slide here. And these are some of the topics that you'll also want to discuss with the families that you serve, and just really getting them up to speed about some of the information here and why it's important. When you think about network connection speed, that's going to affect your overall quality of video and audio clarity. And so the recommended threshold for that is about 3 megabytes for optimal connection when you're screen sharing. Now, when you are doing something beyond just sharing your screen, like if you're looking at a YouTube video, or you are moving through a PowerPoint presentation, they do recommend that that speed is increased. And so if you ever notice when you're connected and you're in the middle of a session, if there are any connectivity issues, something like maybe they have a family member who's streaming Netflix, or you know, maybe one of your family members is doing that, or you may find that you need to move closer to your router to get optimal connectivity. So there are certain recommendations there, or certain things that you can do to troubleshoot when you feel like maybe there's some lag time, or the connectivity isn't exactly where you think it should be. So that's going to be the importance of doing things like doing a speed test, just to see kind of where your levels are there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later too. So one of the main considerations that we're taking into account is with the privacy of student information and informed consent. And so this is a reference slide. At the bottom, you'll see there is in blue where it says joint guidance on the application of FERPA and HIPAA to student health records. This is a great link for your reference, and you may want to have that handy. It's a joint guidance link. It's written by the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education, and it just clarifies for everyone, like school administrators, healthcare professionals, families, just how FERPA and HIPAA apply to education and health records that are maintained about students. And so I won't really go into any additional details about that. I just wanted you to know this is a great reference, and there are some questions and answers in this document that should cover a lot of the issues, you know, that you might have, or questions that you might raise regarding just what's covered, and what you need to be aware of, you know, as you're dealing with student information and you're working from home and the student is at home. So I wanted you guys to have that. When you think about best practices, you hear a lot about this BAA agreement, right? Everybody has to have this BAA agreement. And what this is, the video conferencing platform, they are encrypted to provide that first level of compliance with HIPAA and FERPA. So that encryption provides the SLP, or the clinician, or the OT, and the school district the assurance of protecting client confidentiality or student confidentiality. So the organization or practice or school district, they should be able to demonstrate the encryption of the platform, right? That's how we're going to keep our data and that session private. So the school district should have that on file, or make note of that, should a parent or anybody have any questions about that. Due to the fact that we are kind of smack dab in the middle of the coronavirus, the federal government has actually done some relaxing of those HIPAA enforcements, of like federal penalties, and they're providing more flexibility for providers to choose telepractice platforms. And you'll see things like maybe you know of somebody, or maybe even yourself, maybe you had a doctor's appointment and your doctor used FaceTime. I think everybody is kind of moving along the continuum, right, of best practices, and they're getting to what is recommended, or kind of what that threshold or standard is. But you may have seen that or been part of that. And so that would be an example, of how those regulations have been relaxed during the pandemic. So this right here is a screenshot of ASHA's telepractice page for key issues. So I just wanted you to see that. I wanted you to see how many topics, right, are broken down. And just this is where you're going to find a lot of the answers to your questions. This is where you learn what is the threshold or what the standard of service delivery is. And so all of the information that you'll see when you go to this website, this is what you would be responsible for knowing as a provider. And as I mentioned, during the pandemic, we are providing services in a public health emergency, and there are certain governing practices that might have been loosened. Um, but over the next several slides, we're going to pull some of this content out and discuss it in greater detail. I just want to highlight some of the information and make sure that you're familiar with it. I am not going to discuss assessments. ASHA has a really great web chat with the people over at Pearson Assessments, and they have done a lot of talking about considerations for teletherapy. And at the bottom of this slide, that's what that link is right there. That is actually from September. But they have more recently done a few more of these conversations, these live chats, and I have not been able to get a link for the updated versions of those. I don't know if they're available like this one is, but I did want you to have that reference, and I did want you to know that there are new ones that have been done. I think there's been at least 3 that people have tuned into, and they kind of get their questions answered. You bring questions, and the people from Pearson and ASHA respond to those, but you can kind of scroll through them and find out, just kind of what some of the talking points are, and just see how your district is proceeding, and how maybe Pearson might be an option if need be for assessments to be provided via telepractice. So we have already covered points 1 and 2, but I just want to reiterate, this is an example of just knowing the requirements in your state, and that if you're ever, uncertain, the best thing to do would be to reach out to your state licensing agency and ask. If a state has a tighter regulation, then that's what you would need to follow. Parents, they also have rights concerning their child's participation in teletherapy. If this were pre-COVID, where we had, the option of in-person and virtual therapy, you know, parents would have an option to decline teletherapy and opt for in-person therapy. Now, many districts have many models. You know, I know like even for my daughter in the state and school district where I'm at, they have about 3 options. You can go to school 5 days a week. You have a hybrid option, 2 days of school on site, 3 days virtual, or you can go to school virtually every day. So you have to kind of be aware of what the options are and be able to discuss with parents, you know, can they switch in between? You know, can they opt out for service delivery on site? Is it exclusively teletherapy? Um, in my situation here, where I kind of have a unique situation in that the students that I see are all incarcerated, they don't have the option to opt out of that. That is the only service delivery. If a parent would not want that, I would have to then go physically to that facility. But right now, they have to participate virtually just because we don't have any visitors or any outside people going in and out at the moment. So just knowing kind of what those requirements are is really important. When you think a little bit about an easy way to remember what informed consent is, if you can just think of it like this: if you are giving the parents all the information about what you're going to do, and you're going to tell them how you're going to do it, and then based on providing them that information, they are giving you permission for this activity or therapy to take place. There are several other considerations a school district might also consider when opting for teletherapy, and documentation necessary on a student's IEP. Some districts are going to be navigating and trying to figure out, are they going to reconvene a case conference? Is this considered a change of placement? Is it a change of service delivery? Can all the goals that you were going to work on in person be worked on virtually? Has there been any mandates, you know, just from like the State Department of Education about how certain districts, you know, how everyone is moving forward in addressing some of these concerns? So wide variety of how things are going to be handled state by state, district by district. So when we think about the best practices for informed consent, it has to be in writing, and it has to address the bullets on the slide. It's also important to note that your informed consent should be written at maybe like a 5th or 6th grade level. When we think about newspapers, you know, they're written at this level. There is a Flesch Kincaid readability that you can put your document through, you know, just copy and paste it on there, and just to see what reading level the document is. All Americans, or really like the average, I guess, American adult reads at between a 7th and 9th grade level. So just taking that into consideration, you know, that it doesn't have a lot of jargon, that it's really easy, that it's really plain and easy to understand. So you're going to talk about security and privacy measures, how you're keeping those confidential. You're going to talk about the protection of the screen and the use of earphones. I know that most likely they're not going to be in a public setting or on a public Wi-Fi, but if they would be, you know, those would be issues that you would want to discuss. You're going to talk about the type of service to be delivered, usually speech and language therapy or an evaluation. You'll want to share with them the difference between telepractice when compared to face-to-face services. And then you're going to talk some about any confidentiality issues, any types of equipment that you're using, you know, very simple and straightforward. Um, And then I think it's also good to discuss about who all's going to be present and the role of each person and where they're going to be located. You'll also want to discuss any modifications that you're making, and then I always include on there that we're going to monitor the type, the rate, and the quality of transmission, and we're going to do that with speed tests. So we do have a sample document, and there's a link to that. On one of the slides, it just says informed consent, and you can kind of click on that just to see what we have listed there, you know, and compare it or use it as a guide if you need it. When we think about confidentiality of student treatment documents and student information, the privacy of student documents is just really a paramount consideration. And we want to definitely be in compliance, you know, concerning the storage of documents. So if you were at your school and seeing students, you would be able to lock your documents and records in a file cabinet. Perhaps you have file storage in your desk, or even be able to lock the door, you know, to your therapy room. But now that you're at home, you still have to safeguard each student's privacy regarding those session notes or IEP information, as well as the email content. So you may want to consider getting a portable locking, just plastic file box like this. You can see there's a lock on there. I would probably get one that locks on each side. I would probably want one that was a little more secure. Um, I would also recommend, like, if you didn't have something like this, to use a locking briefcase, a carry travel-on bag, a book bag, anything that you could maybe like put a travel lock on there that's a little bit more pliable, you know, with that wire that inserts in there versus this type of lock. But we do want to secure those documents. So when you think about best practices for your computer, you know, you will want to add a couple of security measures on the computer that you're using to provide services. So you will want to password protect your computer on startup, and this will ensure that no one could have access to that student information should your computer get stolen or lost or damaged. And additionally, you'll want to add a timeout feature, right? So if you step away from your computer for longer than a minute or two, it should lock, and that would require you to enter a password to unlock it and resume working. The other thing that you might want to do is, you know, you can set up different users on your computer. So maybe you might have it set to where um, you have yourself logged in as a separate user for teletherapy. So you only have access to the teletherapy information and students, you know, when you log in like that. And that might be a way. You know, I just know, like, at home on my personal computer, I have it set that way, like if my daughter wanted to get on it. I don't want my daughter getting on my computer and having access to all my files. You know, she might delete something or something could go astray. And so I just want her to have access to the things that she needs. So that's why I suggested maybe that you have a different setup, that you just log on and just have access to certain information for teletherapy. So when you think about confidentiality, a lot kind of goes into that. So it could be just the positioning, you know, you want to be in a distraction-free zone, right? You don't want people to have access to the information or see what's going on the screen. Um, your students are going to be really excited to see you. and so we definitely don't want them looking at other places. So if you're able to log out of websites that you're not using, emails, or silence your phone, or disable any kind of like pop-up notifications, if possible. Some things may be tied even into like the startup of your computer. I can remember, I used to have a Skype account, and that was tied to the startup. And so it would, sometimes I would have to close that out because my microphone or my video, it would say like another device was using that. And so I just had to make sure that that was closed out. You always want to check your upload and download speed before your sessions. You can use speed test. You can use a number of different entities that will give you that information. And I always record that. So I know that our session, excuse me, was connected. Our connection was appropriate for being able to share information or viewing videos or sharing PowerPoints and anything like that. Um, One of the most important things that I really can't stress enough is just practice. Whatever platform you're using, please, allow yourself some time to practice. Practice with your friends, practice with your kids, making them go to their room and send them an invite and help them get on and troubleshoot things. So that is just really critical. Just being familiar with that. It's going to seem awkward, at first. Even sometimes now, I still have issues here or there. You would be surprised. It doesn't always go smoothly, no matter how many years of experience, you have. Um, the other thing I want you to be mindful of is just knowing that you're responsible for your students. I want you to know where the record button is and how to turn it off and on during a session. I don't want you to record any sessions. I don't want you to violate any rights there. But I want you to know where it's located because as you are trying to troubleshoot something or fix something and you're clicking on things and unclicking things, you could accidentally click on that. And so I want you to know that if you suddenly look up and you see the red dot is on, that you're recording. Some districts will disable that. I don't know if your district has that ability or maybe it's not on there, but I just want you to be aware of how to turn the recording off if you would accidentally turn it on. If you would start recording, I would suggest that you stop your session, you send a new invite and reconnect. Um, you can always use, Control Alt Delete and select Task Manager to see what programs might be running in the background of your computer. As I mentioned, something could be running that you're unaware of, and it could be attached to the startup of your computer. So you just want to make sure that anything that you don't need, that you have stopped it while you're getting ready to do your therapy sessions. So when we think about student selection, these are the areas that are identified as key issues according to ASHA. Um, the clinical services that we provide are really based on the unique needs of each individual student. And telepractice or teletherapy may not be appropriate in all circumstances or for all students. So there's a lot of considerations, maybe the student and family's culture or the education level, as well as their age and any other relevant characteristics. So you'll have to kind of sort through the benefits and really the challenges of this service delivery model as you're thinking about getting these services up and running. It may be the only service delivery model option available. And so you want to think about how you can ensure the continuity of services. You might find that you need to implement some strategies or techniques in determining eligibility, maybe, or making progress towards goals. You could be doing a lot of collaborating with family members and caregivers, instructing them on how to do things, or how to elicit things that you're trying to get a student to say or do. Um, I think that if you have families that are really open and willing to try teletherapy, I would lean more so on the side of giving a child an opportunity. I wouldn't say, like, because a student presents a certain way, that they are just automatically disqualified. Now, there may be certain circumstances where that's the case, but sometimes you may be able to do, like, let's say you might try like a 6-week trial, see how it goes. Maybe you could work on only 1 or 2 goals, or maybe those goals need to be modified now that you're in a virtual environment. So I just want to caution you that just because a child has a certain type of need, I wouldn't just automatically make them unsuitable, for teletherapy. So there's a lot of research out there, and you might want to just kind of do your due diligence if you are, thinking about certain students that you've had on your caseload, or what modifications are out there. You could look at ASHA, you could look on YouTube. There's a lot of webinars. There's just a lot of access right now for teletherapy and ideas. I also wanted to recommend, there is a really large group for SLPs right now on Facebook, and it's for teletherapy providers. And so a lot of people are asking questions and getting feedback and sharing their resources. And so if you're not already a member of that group, go on there, go on Facebook and look, because that's just a great community of people who are really willing to share a lot of their expertise and information about therapy ideas, about platforms, about different kinds of students too. So when we're thinking about preparing for sessions, a lot of times this seems like the biggest hurdle, right? Because it's a little bit different than how we're preparing when we're face to face. So when we think about our workspace, of course, the best practice is to find a blank wall, or maybe position your desk so that your back is to a blank wall. I think sometimes in our space at home, that seems weird to have the backs of our monitors or whatever facing the middle of the room. But I think it's important, to minimize those distractions. And also be mindful of your lighting. Think about where the window is and closing the blinds, or there's videos on YouTube that tell you about the placement of your lighting, and how that should be, so that it's an enhancement rather than a distraction. You want to also think about, just making sure that you're testing your audio and video equipment. I would try to log into your session about 5 minutes early. You can use this time to troubleshoot anything on your side if needed. You can open up any websites or specific activities. You can, if you're using any kind of videos like on kids' YouTube or anywhere, you can have those set to where you want them to be. Sometimes they'll play like a advertisement at the beginning, and you don't always want to take up the time, for 30 seconds or a minute to sit through that. You do know that you can't use the same session all day. Like, you can't create a session and then have all your students log into the same session, because that's not HIPAA compliant. You'll also want to write down any particular issues maybe like that a family might have. So anything technically, that you had to do for a family, that might be helpful, moving forward. I think you can solve problems more quickly quickly, or maybe ask them, hey, this is what we did last time. Can you try this out? And you can also ask them too, like, hey, can you hear me okay? Do you hear any background noise? Um, Sometimes there can just be like a hum or a buzz or a bad connection, and you might want to reconnect. It could be a fan, or it could just be anything. I know sometimes when I'm on meetings, someone will just have some kind of hum, and you're just not really sure what it is, or where it's coming from. So, just ask them to make sure that they can hear you okay. I do use the headset with the boom microphone. I really like that. I feel like it really gets my voice amplified into their ears. And if they have that on their end, that's really optimal. But if they at least have like maybe like the earbuds, like the noise canceling earbuds with the microphone that you would use for your cell phone, that's really good too. But really the most important thing is going to be your face, and your expression, that in conjunction with the activity that you're working on with the student too. So this is just a great picture of how my workspace is set up. I usually use 2 monitors, and I have the platform opened on the right-hand side. I use Zoom for that, and so I have that open on the right, and on the left is where I share my screen to, and I kind of have the activities that I'm going to use there. And there's a lot of technical trainings that a lot of the platforms have, so if you have any questions, about, what capabilities a certain platform has, they have done a really nice job in providing those. I usually try to have everything organized. I use Chrome browser, and I usually have like um, the bookmarks bar across the top. So all of my most used websites I put up there, and I try to just have my login information saved. That kind of cuts down on time. And if you're like me, it's very difficult to remember all the passwords for all the websites that we have in our life, right? So when you think about, what to wear, it's always really recommended that you kind of stick with solid colors, avoid things that are like plaids or distracting, or really super bright colors that could cause any additional like eye strain or be like visually distracting. And then consider avoiding like shiny jewelry or things that are jingly or clank, like a bracelet or a watch or something on the desk. You'd be surprised, how those sounds can really amplify to the listener. So the district should be coordinating, efforts to reach out to parents or give you directives about that, and determine their readiness to participate in teletherapy. On this particular slide, I've just given you a link to our teletherapy readiness checklist. So if you wanted to look that over and just kind of see what some of the questions are that we ask our families, there are some technical questions and some consent items. You might want to use this as a reference, so that you know what issues need to be addressed in the kind of like consideration phase of implementation. ASHA also has a really great resource. It's a checklist, a PDF checklist. If you search like teletherapy, school-based teletherapy practice checklist or something like that. I've seen a few versions of that checklist actually. So I think the most recent version of it is like a gray and maroon color, but there's a lot of links on there and a lot of steps, and it's really nice because there's a place for you to take notes and just really provide you with a comprehensive approach to getting started as well. So once your written consent has been obtained, you want to just kind of be mindful that you're scheduling students through the recommended platform or method of the district so that they can potentially account for a therapy session or that you've reached out to them. So many times there's a mechanism in that platform that will allow the administrator to see how many minutes a session was or how many times you saw a student during a month, that month. You just want to make sure that you have contact information for the caregiver who's going to be present. And then think about how you're going to communicate. You know, if you were late or the student was late or they needed to cancel a session, think about how that information is going to be conveyed. And then if you are thinking about, you know, should I have the student have any supplies on their end? I I kind of have my own personal thought on that, and that is that I really try not to ask my families or parents to supply anything on the student's end. I feel like sometimes the families that we're working with um, are very overwhelmed to think about that their child is going to be home and, you know, learning virtually. You know, I think the stressors on families right now are immense. And I think that if we make too many requests of a family, that that may hinder them, you know, just from actually participating. But if I can say to them, hey, you know, you don't need anything. You just need the connection. I know that you've been screened. I know you have internet connection and a laptop or computer, and you know we can get started. That is much more doable for a family than if I were to give them a list of things that they needed or needed to have ready. You know, and I do realize that other disciplines might need manipulatives or something, and of course that's understood. But I just, you know, from an SLP perspective, I just try to say, hey, you know, we have so many great things that we have access to through the internet and through the things that I'm going to provide. You know, I just try to simplify it as much as possible. So one of the issues that might come up, you know, from time to time, I think is engagement, you know, based on how old the student is that you're going to be working with and their interest level. And so it could be a challenge. You know, some kiddos are going to do just fine with this, but others are going to struggle, you know, to stay focused or attend or stay motivated, you know. So it's a little bit different, you know, through the computer, you know. So you want to just be mindful of what your student can tolerate. You know, maybe if you have the ability to really pick an optimal time for that kiddo, um, you know, that might be an option. You know, just talking with the parent, like, hey, 2 o'clock, you know, is this typical, you know, behavior for your child around this time of day? Sometimes kids are exhausted. You know, everybody seems to have kind of a crazy sleep schedule. You know, everybody's daily routines are off. And so if you're able to, you know, move that student to the morning, you know, that might be beneficial. I think also as, you know, we move to a different type of learning, you know, a lot of schools are changing the structure. So what they did in the spring, you know, might not be the same way that they are providing instruction to students now. And so there may be some other parameters around when you have access to these kiddos or how you get them and engage with them. So you may not have the luxury of just switching, or, you know, it just could also be based on the parent and child availability. I want you to think too about, you know, just finding out what the interests are of a child if you're having difficulty keeping them engaged. So if you're able to find things, you know, around topics or interests that they have, they're likely to stay stay with you a little bit longer. And you may need to change things up. You may not be able to do just the same type of activity each week or each session. And once you kind of get comfortable, you'll be able to offer a little bit more variety, and just taking notes of which types of activities the child seems most engaged with. You might need a reinforcer. Maybe you need 6 short activities, and so if you're working with students that you've worked with before, you already have an idea, of what keeps them engaged. Um, so that's always a great place to start. And then, depending on the length of your session, you might need a break. You might need a break for your eyes or your back or, your students. Everybody is kind of sedentary, in this service delivery model. We're not getting up and going down the hall and getting our students and coming back and, having the ability to move around like that. So also just take note, like about your ergonomic setup, of your therapy space. I don't know what the appropriate chair height is or computer screen height or, what might make your back hurt, or I just feel sometimes like I have this little soft spot, from the pressure of moving my mouse around, so there just may be extra little comforts, that you need or maybe the student needs as well. So when we think a little bit about best practices for preparing for the session, these are just some great pieces of advice, just making sure that you're not including ads. I watched a video the other day where somebody was talking about an ad that came up, and it wasn't like the ad was inappropriate. It just was, she didn't feel comfortable with the ad, and so she just felt that it was awkward. So if you're able to, minimize any of those types of issues, and then you want to think too about using, as many modalities, as you can um, when you're working with kiddos. Um, you want to kind of be overly excited and animated with younger students. Do they need a reinforcer? Do they need a break? Do you need something to get their focus again before you move on? Um, you want to just make sure that you're following all your district processes and procedures for any kind of documentation that you would be doing. Sometimes that might be an online, sometimes it might be just like some type of session form that you've created, and I have some recommendations for that coming up. Just make sure that I would kind of discourage you from doing any like typing during the session, like typing a note into an online system or something like that. Typing is very noisy. I don't know how you would manage also like navigating the session, moving in and out between activities, keeping your child engaged and trying to type. Like that would be a lot, right? So I just would say try to take enough notes, that you're able to document properly what took place during that session. Um, so you want to kind of think about documenting consistently and to the highest standards possible. These are all of the things I have on the form that I have created. And I can kind of go into a little bit of detail. Of course, you want to know the time in, the time out, and the total time, and you want that to correspond with any kind of record keeping that is taking place on um, the platform that you're using. And then the rationale for teletherapy, I usually have boxes that I check, and that is because there's a physical barrier. There is maybe like social limitations, geographic barrier, and I've added COVID-19, as one of my options. And then I always indicate what kind of session we're having. I indicate where the student is and where I am, and then I do have some verbiage just about the video and audio quality and connectivity during the treatment session. I always note, what my upload and download speed was, and then I kind of have some boxes I check off, like, was this session fully acceptable? Was it acceptable with minor delays? It was minimally acceptable. There were noticeable interruptions. There was no effect on quality of treatment. There was moderate effect. I just try to just note and be as detailed as possible. I indicate any family member or helper who was present. Were they observing? Were they assisting? And then I always kind of at the bottom have information there about what the students' goals are, as well as what we did during our session, what goals were targeted, what activities or websites that we used, and then the actual session data, just kind of keeping track of how we progressed through that and how the student did. So it's kind of detailed, but some of that, I pre-fill in. Then I don't have as many things to kind of check off, so but those are all of the things I kind of target, and you can find a session document or create one. I'm sure there are many to choose from, or your district may have one as well. So here we are. It is 28 slides in. We haven't even had a session yet, right? So now we're going to be ready for our first session. So this is a great bullet list of what you can do during your first session, right? You're definitely going to want to make sure that you discuss the components of informed consent. Also, this one-on-one time might be great for the parents to ask you questions. So you may want to pause after the topics that you covered. Maybe you want to explain in greater detail or provide them with examples, or ask if they have any questions. And you may want to give them, maybe you want to give them like a link to information about the platform that we're using. If you feel like your parents are pretty technically savvy and this would be of interest to them, and they're really with it in that department. If you don't think so, I wouldn't recommend that. It might just feel too overwhelming. But you can just kind of discuss all of these items. You might want to make yourself a checklist. You might want to kind of discuss where the student currently is with their goals and give a parent sort of like a roadmap, of sorts, about how you plan on working on the targeted goals. You'll want to think about developing your backup plan or ways to communicate if there are technical issues. And then you maybe want to think about, talking with the parents about how you're going to maximize your time and efficiency during that session. This may be the first time, that the parent sees what you do in therapy. They all really have an idea about what kiddos do when they're in class, but they may not really know what you do with them. So you may want to just spend some time talking there. You may want to go out to a website or two and just show them, all the features, that you're going to have access to and the fun things that you're going to do. You may also want to designate a time either at the beginning or the end of a session, and maybe establish that early on just for like parent questions or concerns. If the parent is going to be sitting there in the session with you, we're trying to maximize our time, with the kiddos, and so if a parent is interjecting or they have a lot of questions and you feel like they're kind of taking over the session, you may want to make adjustments there too. Okay, so we have reached a stopping point, so we want to check and see if there are any questions about anything that we have covered so far before we move forward. So I'm going to be discussing really some great go-to websites for consideration. There are really so many options right now for teletherapy resources, and all in all, that's a good thing, but it can also feel a bit overwhelming, right? Like you want to know that you are utilizing resources that you're going to kind of get the most bang for your buck out of, that you can see a lot of kids and you're kind of laser focused. You don't want to go to 10 or 12 different websites, right? That's a lot to learn, so my thought in the websites that I kind of have listed here is that I wanted you to kind of have the most bang for your buck. I wanted them to kind of be able to move through lots of different kiddos. I just feel like that's a better option to help you get familiar. And then you have to think about too, what is it that you want to do with each website? Do you want to set up classes in each website? Do you not want to? I don't usually set up classes and have my kids all listed in there. I just want to know what activities I'm going to pull from those resources. Um, the other thing is that your districts may have resources that they already pay for, like they have district accounts. Maybe they have a district account at Scholastic or Epic Learning, or, there are so many great options right now. And so if there is something, that your district is already paying for that you can utilize, that's a great place to look, because a lot of your teachers may also be using content there. And so that really helps reinforce what's going on in the classroom. Um, One of the things that I wanted to show you um, and talk about a little bit is what I kind of call a visual lesson plan. Now, this is from Teachers Pay Teachers, and it is a lesson plan for distance learning for spring, right? And when I saw this, I fell in love. It gave me the warm fuzzies. I am a very visual learner. If there's a lot of numbers, if there is a lot of content, I want to turn it into a graph or a chart or something to help me digest it. And I think like as I move through all of these websites and I move through all of these resources that I have, it never really feels good to me that they're just in folders. I have a folder and a subfolder and a folder on top of a folder, and I just don't process things like that. And so when I came across this, I was like, oh my gosh, this feels good, So I needed an organizational system that meets my needs. That's really huge. So that helped me a lot, when I was able to just kind of find something that I thought was really good. Um, I think that as everything is now virtual, all your resources and everything, you may want to think about how you're going to organize this. Is the same system that you used in person, is that going to be effective for you for online therapy? Will you organize your resources by IEP goal, or will you create folders? Will you organize by the child served or the group served? Um, there's a lot to kind of take into account, but I always feel like the more you're kind of able to do on the front end, I think it'll have a long-term payoff. So everybody is a little bit different, in how they want to organize. But I definitely wanted to give you this option if you're like me. This is page 2 of that lesson plan. Option. And I really like this because I felt like no matter what activity, I wanted to do, I could organize it all in one place. So you could change, the titles. This one just happens to be video or activity, movement, coloring page. You could make that, maybe you could put the title at the top, and then maybe you had different websites, that you used. And you can think about, like, think of it like a dashboard concept maybe. You'll just want to ensure that, that you're logged into all these websites that you want to use ahead of time. You could even use this page just for you and not share it with your student. You don't have to share this information. This could just be something that you're using to pull things up and get organized. You just have to think about, what you think works good, but for me, I really like this because I could see everything I wanted to do in one place. So one of the websites that I really like and I like to use with my high school students is Read Theory. It is a K through 12, but of all the kind of websites that I have picked and presented here, this is a little less flashy, less colorful, but it's really great for reading comprehension. There are thousands of exercises and worksheets here. It does automatically recognize the student's reading level, and it matches them, with the appropriate text and with the appropriate questions. This is the only website that I have a teacher account and a student account, just because it gives me a lot of good data during our sessions together. So I really try to take advantage of that. The other great thing, they have some resources over there on one of their pages, and it's called 50 Tools for Remote and Distance Learning. And they give you some great plugins. They give you some great suggestions for all kinds of things like progress monitoring or keeping track of things, or if you need a whiteboard, so there's just a lot of good resources. Some of them are good for teachers, some of them are good for other disciplines. So I would just encourage you to head over there and just kind of check those things out. They'll kind of make more sense to you kind of once you're up and running in teletherapy. Like sometimes you might click on something and think, how would I use this? But once you're kind of a little bit more familiar, some of them it'll fit right in, and they'll be a godsend. Like it's really nice that some of these things exist to make your life easier, right? One of the other websites I really like is ReadWorks. There's a teacher guide. You can kind of click on that to find out more in depth about what the site has to offer and how you might really just best utilize that when you're working with your students. You can search text by grade level. You can kind of filter by Lexile. You can look for different content, and they have like different kinds of like question sets and vocabulary development. So there's just a lot of different things that you can do with this site. There are many, education and therapy-based websites that have opened a lot of their content for free, particularly if you have a, K-12 email, address. So you might want to look into something like that also. These three I like to talk about together: Epic Learning, Abdo Kids, and Kids Play and Create. I had utilized a spring topic, and I started searching like on Epic. This is good for grades K through 5. They have some Spanish options too. But I was searching for the topic spring, and I was really able to move through the content seamlessly between these three websites. And so that's why I wanted to show you together, show them to you together. For Epic, I do have a personal account there. It was a parental account. So I do pay for that. But I know for a while they had educator ones for free. Abdo Kids, I got to Abdo Kids because there was a code at the end of the story that I was using on Epic Reading, and you just click on that code and it took you to Abdo Kids, and there was more information and more options around the same topic. So I was able to kind of work in a theme through all of these websites here. So boom cards, I think, are the best. Um, they're really awesome because they're interactive. You know, it's kind of like a game mode. So you're able to do a lot of kind of interactive things. I think because of the movement, you know, and some of the sound and animation, I think it's really great for both getting and keeping students' attention. They have a lot of items on here for free. So if something is free, it costs 0 points. And you can kind of download and save these into your own personal library over there. So anything that's free, once you download it and save it, it's yours. So there's a lot of great content there. Sometimes you will also see the boom cards over on Teachers Pay Teachers. But if it's on Teachers Pay Teachers, I would encourage you to go over to boom cards to download it, because it'll just kind of be a two-step process. If you do it over on Teachers Pay Teachers, you don't actually get it there. You have to go over to Boom. So that's kind of the only caveat there, but this is probably my favorite site, you know, the one that I use the most with students. On YouTube, they also have a Boom School, and here you can watch an entire presentation. It's about an hour long, and they have one now specifically for using their resources in speech therapy. So that's really worthwhile to take advantage of that. And then they also have like smaller, shorter videos, more like how to, you know, how to do something. And those are shorter, like 5 minutes. I kind of like it presented that way because that helps you just to kind of chunk information, you know, like you might just get so far in learning a concept and then you're like, oh, hey, you know, I'm ready for some more information now. So that's always good. These two right here, this is the spinner and the dice. You know, if you need a virtual dice roll or wheel decide, those are the links up there that are turned blue on the spinners and dice. So if you're playing a game or you have the ability to customize this spinner, there are up to 100 fields, you know, that you can customize in there. So that's really nice. I think spinners are awesome. I love to watch anything, you know, and see where it's going to land. I think kids do too. If you think about making original content, you know, maybe you have students who need more specialized instruction, and a great way to accomplish that would be to create like a custom PowerPoint. And so, you know, I just did this with some vacation pictures. You know, there are pictures here. You could have stimulus pictures here. You could have pictures related to that child specifically. You could have manipulatives here. You could position things in a certain way to work on content, such as like next to, in front of. It's just really endless, you know, what you could accomplish. These links right here are live, and you can click on them to get greater instruction about making interactive PDFs or creating drag and drop activities. These are all how-tos, you know, so I wanted you to have that information because it's not really hard. And it's fun for the kids too, you know, to kind of play these customized games. If you're looking for resources in Teachers Pay Teachers, those are some topics that you might want to search, you know, and find things. No print, internet activities, digital activities, and digital task cards. And these are some teletherapy session examples. I wanted to just provide a few of these for you to take a look at. Each SLP really has their own style that they bring to a session, as well as the way they interact with the students. And I just really want you to know that there is just not a one-size-fits-all kind of way to do therapy. I mean, we are all unique. We all bring different gifts and talents with us. And so I just want to encourage you to continue to bring that into the teletherapy world as well. We're all going to make mistakes. I don't want you to be afraid of that. We all have things, that we're working on, as we're becoming proficient, providing services this way. And I just wanted to share a little story. I was looking for great content, great videos to share with you, as I was trying to compile a good list here. And then I saw a video that was on YouTube. It was meant to be an example, right, of a teletherapy session. The video was about 14 minutes long. I thought, okay, that'll be great, not too lengthy. And the first 9 minutes of the video they were spent troubleshooting audio difficulties. So I just want you to know, it doesn't matter if you're new at this or if you've been doing it for several years, you're just going to encounter issues. But I don't want you to be discouraged. Those kiddos and those families that you serve are really counting on you. And so I just want you to know that there are a ton of resources available, and I just want to encourage you to keep moving forward and keep honing your skills in this area. So we have reached the end. We made it. I hope that you found this presentation to be just a good kind of comprehensive starting point, as you are embarking on this service delivery option. Just remember that it is up to you to know what the standard is for service delivery, and just to continue to do your due diligence and educate yourself on the various technical and clinical components of telepractice. So we'll open up the floor now to see if there are any additional questions about the second part of the presentation. And I will just leave my contact information up there, my email, and I just want to say thank you for watching.